A 10-year-old black boy spoke honestly. His teacher publicly embarrassed him before the entire class. But a more significant moment occurred when his father, the mayor, entered the room silently. This incident began immediately following the morning announcements at Oakwood Elementary in Topeka, Kansas. The bell had just sounded, and the noise of chairs moving and students taking their places echoed throughout the classroom. Mrs. Trudy Holbrook was positioned at the front, arms crossed as usual, tapping her pen against the whiteboard. She was a teacher known for her rigid approach, prioritizing rules over warmth. For most students, she was acceptable, strict, but reliable. 10-year-old Malik Jefferson was seated by the window in the third row back. He was one of those students who didn't speak often, but when he did, people paid attention. Not because he was boisterous, but because he always conveyed his thoughts with purpose. He felt a surge of quiet satisfaction that morning. The night before, his dad had held a significant press conference regarding new scholarships for underserved communities. Malik had watched him on television and believed the entire city was now aware of what he already knew. His dad cared. As Mrs. Holbrook reviewed the day's plans, she announced a special visitor would be coming to the school on Friday. She stated that someone from City Hall would be present, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. They hadn't informed me of the person involved. Malik's hand rose slightly. "Yes, Malik?" she inquired, her tone already showing irritation. "I believe it could be my father," he stated calmly. "He mentioned he was traveling here this week. He holds the position of mayor." The room fell silent. Several children glanced around. One girl murmured, "Wait, is that true?" Mrs. Holbrook looked at him. She then released a brief, abrupt laugh, more of a derisive sound. "Oh, Malik, that's quite imaginative," she remarked, extending the final word as if it were hurtful. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, just sat there, eyes forward. "I'm not making it up," he said softly. "He's Mayor Jefferson," she said, her smile fading. "Malik, this is a place for learning, not for telling stories. If the mayor were your father, I think we'd all know by now, don't you?" The silence was thicker now. Some of the kids shifted in their chairs. A boy in the back let out a quiet laugh. Malik stared at the desk in front of him. His hands remained still in his lap. "Let's focus on the facts, not stories," she stated, and continued the lesson. However, the class was no longer engaged, still processing her previous statement and tone. The words were not simply dismissive, they held a sharper edge, conveying a message. "Someone like you couldn't possibly be someone like that, son." The most painful aspect wasn't the content of her words, but the swiftness with which the class embraced them. Jasmine, who typically sat with Malik at lunch, avoided looking at him for the remainder of the morning. Two boys positioned by the window murmured and chuckled each time he spoke. Malik remained silent for the rest of the lesson, not due to fear, but because he felt it wasn't worthwhile. Afterward, that same day, in the hallway, his friend Bryce approached him close to the lockers. "Hey man," Bryce said, sounding somewhat unsure. Malik didn't pause. "Yeah," Bryce acknowledged slowly. She didn't need to phrase it that way. Bryce looked down, thinking she believed he was lying. Malik offered a hesitant shrug, suggesting she tell the principal. Would it make a difference? For a moment, Bryce couldn't respond. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Holbrook resumed teaching as if nothing had occurred. She likely assumed the incident was resolved. A student had made a false statement, and a teacher had corrected him. Case closed. But that's the nature of words. They don't always fade when the school day ends. The events didn't remain confined to the classroom, as someone beyond those walls had become aware of what occurred and intended to speak out. By Thursday morning, Malik felt uncomfortable. He woke up early, as he always did, dressed, and sat through breakfast with his mom, who observed his unusual quietness. He remained largely silent. He wasn't one to express complaints. That wasn't how he was raised. Nevertheless, a weighty feeling settled in his chest. The feeling lingered, the sting of speaking honestly and being met with derision. As he entered room 204, Mrs. Holbrook had already begun writing the warm-up exercise on the board. The classroom appeared identical to the previous day. The same rows of desks, the same posters on the walls, the same teacher present. Yet, something felt different. Students whispered more frequently than usual. Several glanced in Malik's direction before quickly averting their gaze. He noticed Jasmine whispering to a classmate, her eyes flickering towards him, a giggle escaping her lips. Then came the moment that reignited the tension. Mrs. Hallbrook started a history lesson, focusing on community leaders and local government. The situation felt heavy with irony, enough to fill the entire school. As she wrote the names of elected officials on the whiteboard, she briefly looked at Malik and gave a smile, but it lacked warmth. You know, she said, addressing the class, we should always be cautious about feigning a different identity. Honesty is particularly crucial for significant positions, such as mayor or governor. She refrained from mentioning his name, yet the effect was unmistakable. Every eye in the classroom shifted toward Malik, as if by design. He remained composed, lowering his head and recording the date in his notebook. Let's return to the facts, she continued, her smile unwavering. It's easy for anyone to claim they're the mayor's child. That assertion isn't enough. Verifiable evidence is what truly matters. A chuckle arose from somewhere in the rear of the classroom. The release was sudden, a brief moment where the pressure gave way. She made no effort to restrain it. In fact, she seemed to find it amusing, as if she's told a perfectly executed jest. However, to Malik, it wasn't a jest. It wasn't an instruction either. It was a disguised humiliation, presented with a formal demeanor and a whiteboard marker in her hand. He tightened his grip on his pencil, not to damage it, merely to maintain composure. Bryce was in the front row, visibly uneasy, his mouth slightly parted as if he had something to say but couldn't articulate it. The remainder of the lesson passed quickly. For the first time, Malik didn't volunteer any answers, didn't offer to read aloud, and didn't even complete the worksheet. During recess, he walked the edge of the playground by himself. No one inquired about his well-being. They were preoccupied with continuing to laugh at the joke. Bryce rejoined him again, close to the jungle gym. You really should tell someone I did, Malik said. Who? My mom. Is she going to call the school? She told my dad. Bryce blinked. Wait, the mayor, Malik nodded. There was a pause. What's he going to do? Malik looked out past the fence. He said I should keep showing up. That sounded simple, but it hit hard. Malik didn't need his dad to yell or storm the building. He needed to know someone still believed him. And he did. That afternoon, while students engaged in silent reading, Mrs. Hallbrook introduced the topic of respecting authority. She posed several questions and then stated, and naturally, we must not pretend to be someone we are not to achieve that authority. Such actions would be dishonest and disrespectful to genuine leaders in our community. She then made eye contact with Malik for a moment that felt deliberate and directed towards him. He looked up at her and then lowered his gaze to his book. Mrs. Hallbrook turned away, likely believing the issue was resolved. Perhaps she thought her brief remarks had restored order to the classroom, that the lesson had been conveyed, and her authority reasserted. However, she was unaware that another individual had listened intently and was approaching to ensure the lesson she believed she was imparting would be entirely revised. The dining hall at Oakwood Elementary was a noisy area, not due to disorder, but because of established habits, trays making sounds, chairs scraping, juice boxes opening. But that Thursday, a different sound was present, a sound that lingered around specific tables and focused on one name, as if it were a mark. Malik was seated opposite Bryce at the far end of table 5, pushing the tater tots around on his tray. He hadn't touched his chocolate milk, which was unusual. Typically, it was the first thing he consumed. Bryce spoke softly, drawing closer. People were still discussing it. I'm aware of that. I overheard Ava mention her mother said Mayor Jefferson's son attend a private school. Malik glanced up, his brow raised. Yes, I attend a private school. I only transferred here 2 months ago. My mother wanted me nearer to her workplace. Bryce rubbed his head. I suppose people just prefer to think you're being deceptive. They'd rather believe that than accept that I'm telling the truth. They both looked down the table, where 2 kids were giggling and whispering, glancing back and forth at Malik. One of them, a boy named Derek, leaned over and said, just loud enough, guess anyone can say their dad's the mayor now, huh? Malik didn't answer. Bryce stood up halfway, then stopped himself. "Not worth it," Malik muttered. The whole room felt colder, even though the sun poured through the windows like any other day, but kids had a way of carrying an echo. A statement, once made, lingered like a marble on a tile surface. It didn't disappear simply because the speaker stopped. Jasmine walked past their table accompanied by two friends, and one of them murmured, "He still thinks he's the mayor's kid." That was the instant Bryce rose to his feet. "You'll need to be quiet," he stated, his voice wavering a little. People turned to look. Jasmine appeared surprised briefly, then folded her arms. "We're merely expressing what everyone is already thinking." Perhaps it was time for everyone to reconsider perspectives like those of Mrs. Hellbrook. A noticeable change occurred. Several students visibly reacted, some widening their eyes. A few even murmured quietly amongst themselves. Bryce quickly took a seat, his heart racing. Malik remained silent, simply observing his friend. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. However, lunch continued. A girl named Kaylee, seated at a nearby table, raised her hand partway and said, "Wait, I saw Mayor Jefferson last year at the ribbon cutting at West Park. Didn't he have a kid with him?" Bryce turned to her. "Yeah, that was Malik." She squinted. His hair was different. "It was shorter back then," Malik said, finally speaking up. Kaylee stared at him. A few kids at her table grew quiet. One appeared unsure. Another leaned in and whispered something. Gradually, the doubts started to diminish. The structure remained intact, but it shifted slightly. That's often the beginning. Not with a declaration or an explanation, but with uncertainty, quiet, and absence in the usual sounds. When the bell signaled the end of lunch, Malik took his tray and rose. He didn't hurry, and he didn't droop. He moved with the composure of someone possessing knowledge that others lacked. Bryce followed. As they headed back, passing Mrs. Hallbrook's classroom, they observed her standing close to the doorway, talking to a different teacher. She noticed them but didn't smile. She simply observed. For 1 second too long, Bryce looked toward Malik. "She knows your dad's coming, doesn't she?" Malik replied. "He said he'd stop by today." They didn't converse much after that. There was nothing further to discuss. Rumors had spread throughout the building, and whether people accepted them was irrelevant, as the truth still had more to reveal about that classroom, because something significant was already unfolding and was nearer than anyone realized. By the time Anthony Jefferson entered his office at City Hall that Thursday morning, his phone had already buzzed twice. Carla, his assistant, was waiting, holding a folder and wearing the concerned expression she reserved for sensitive matters. "It's about Malik," she stated even before he had removed his blazer. Anthony paused. "What about him?" Carla quietly closed the door. "You might want to sit down." He remained standing. She opened the folder, which contained 2 printed emails. One was from another parent concerning an incident in Mrs. Hellbrook's classroom. The second message came from the school secretary, a person Anthony had known for years, informing him about a situation where his son was being questioned in front of others by his teacher concerning his family history. Anthony read both messages deliberately, with no visible emotion. He displayed neither anger nor panic. He simply sighed. Carla observed him intently. "Should I contact the school?" he asked. "No," he replied. "I will manage it myself." She nodded and departed silently. Anthony paused, his gaze fixed on the city map adorning the wall. He held a significant position. He was the first black mayor Topeka had elected. He had contested diligently for that office, not for the prestige, but driven by a belief in the power of visibility and representation, the conviction that young people like Malik should grow up feeling a sense of belonging. He settled into his chair, reached for his phone, and dialed a number from memory. "Hello." His wife answered. "Did Malik mention anything to you?" A moment of silence followed. "He recounted yesterday's events to me," she stated. However, he didn't wish to escalate the situation. "It is a significant matter," Anthony asserted. She publicly embarrassed him before everyone. His wife released a sigh. He claimed he was fine. "He isn't." Another pause followed. "So what's your plan?" "I'm going to the school. Would you like to accompany me?" "No, but I need you to collect him afterward." "Very well," she replied softly. "Make it meaningful." He ended the call, rose, retrieve his navy suit jacket from the back of the chair, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. The situation wasn't intended to be argumentative. He avoided unnecessary disagreements. However, certain teachings require direct interaction. As he exited the building, two aides attempted to detain him with urgent requests, but he dismissed them with a courteous yet resolute gesture. "This will be brief," he stated. The driver opened the vehicle door for him without prompting. No inquiries were made regarding his destination, yet they understood, judging by his expression, that it held significance. The journey to Oakwood Elementary proceeded in silence. As the car entered the school's visitor lot, several students were concluding recess. He observed Malik across the yard, heading toward the building with another boy. His demeanor appeared more subdued than normal. Anthony did not signal, nor did he speak. He simply watched. He waited in the front office for a brief period as the receptionist placed a call to room 204. She offered him coffee. He refused. After 10 minutes, a hallway aide directed him through the corridor. He proceeded deliberately, not due to apprehension, but to observe his surroundings. He needed time to assess the environment, the kind of world his son experienced while he attended city council meetings and addressed questions from reporters. Before entering room 204, he hesitated. He detected the sounds of a lesson taking place within. He allowed the aide to resume her duties, then carefully turned the handle and opened the door. The lesson abruptly ceased, 30 sets of eyes fixed on the doorway. Standing there, tall, poised, and not smiling, was Mayor Anthony Jefferson. Unbeknownst to those in the room, this visit wasn't related to politics. It concerned fatherhood, truth, and ensuring silence wouldn't prevail. The classroom fell silent, as if someone had pressed pause. Mrs. Holbrook's mouth slightly opened. Her marker remained suspended in the air, paused halfway through writing civic responsibility on the board. She didn't move for a moment. Every student's attention shifted from her to the man standing at the entryway. Malik glanced up. He paused momentarily. It wasn't due to apprehension, but something different. A sense of ease, familiarity. The way his father occupied a space wasn't with loudness or spectacle. It was with an inherent quality, a kind that didn't solicit focus. It simply existed. Mayor Jefferson entered, without haste, without agitation. He didn't appear upset. He didn't appear self-satisfied. He appeared like a man who was fully aware of what had been stated, and who wanted it to end. Mrs. Holbrook initiated the conversation. Mayor Jefferson, acknowledging with a single nod, responded, "I'm sure it is." She moved aside a little uncomfortably, almost as if making room for him, even though she appeared somewhat displaced. The mayor surveyed the surroundings. "I'd like to address the class briefly, if that's acceptable." She paused. "I hadn't been notified of I won't take long." She retreated further. Anthony Jefferson then turned to the students. "Some of you are familiar with me, and others may not be. I am Anthony Jefferson. I serve as the mayor of this city. But more importantly," he paused and let his eyes land on Malik. "I'm Malik's dad." The silence deepened. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the kids who had been giggling the day before were frozen now. He continued, his tone even. "Yesterday and today, my son was told by someone in authority that he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. That claiming me as his father was some kind of joke." He didn't look at Mrs. Holbrook. Not once. Everyone understood who he was referring to. "I'm not intending to cause anyone discomfort. I don't support that approach. However, I do value significant instances. These are times when individuals gain an understanding of what respect entails and what it doesn't." He paused and looked around the classroom. Respect involves attentive listening, even when a person's narrative differs from your preconceived notions. It requires trusting a student when they speak, particularly when they are sharing their genuine experiences. And it necessitates acknowledging that your expectations do not determine another person's lived reality. A young woman in the front row fidgeted. Malik observed silently, without blinking, carefully taking in every word. Anthony continued. "Serving as mayor involves more than just legislation or official gatherings. It's about demonstrating the right behavior. My son didn't require me to protect him. He needed me to be present. And here I am, yet still no one moved. Then, gradually, he turned to address the woman seated at the room's front. Mrs. Holbrook, he said, his voice remaining even, I expect this won't recur. Not to my son, and not to any student. She started to speak, but remained silent. Only a brief, hesitant nod followed. He understood and addressed the class, saying, I'll leave you to your learning. Malik's gaze met his son's. We'll talk later, Malik acknowledged, nodding in return. A sense of release washed over him. The first easing he's felt all day. Mayor Jefferson departed without a ceremony or applause. The silence was profound, echoing more powerfully than any possible outburst. In the hallway, Anthony hesitated. He felt no need to glance over his shoulder. Within the classroom, there was no laughter. There was no murmuring. Mrs. Holbrook remained motionless, her hands clasped firmly. The lesson had ceased, yet a different atmosphere had begun. Despite the mayor's departure from the room, the consequences lingered. They persisted significantly. Certain statements cannot be undone, and certain realities remain even after the door shuts. The remainder of the school day proceeded sluggishly, as if the power had been disconnected. The students were more subdued, demonstrating greater concentration. It wasn't fear that prompted their actions, but a heightened understanding. A tangible change had occurred. Mrs. Holbrook attempted to resume her previous approach. Her tone remained even, yet her hands trembled slightly as she handled the marker. She avoided eye contact, refrained from calling on Malik, and made no further mention of civic responsibility. Malik, meanwhile, adopted a more upright posture. He displayed no smile. He made no effort to demonstrate anything. He simply listened, recorded notes, responded to questions when prompted, as was his usual practice. This time, however, the students were attentive. When the bell signaled the end of class and backpacks were being packed, the students departed more deliberately. Several cast quick looks in Malik's direction as they passed. A few offered a quiet, "See you," or gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Jasmine paused near the door, appearing as though she desired to speak, but ultimately left with her friends. Bryce remained near Malik's desk. "Are you all right?" Bryce asked. "I'm fine," Malik replied. Then he didn't raise his voice. Bryce affirmed. It wasn't necessary. What resonated most with people was the manner in which Mayor Jefferson entered that classroom, conveyed what was necessary, and departed without raising his voice. There was no yelling, no intimidation, no theatrical display. He simply stated the truth. And truth requires no amplification. It only needs to be spoken. Subsequently that afternoon, Mrs. Holbrook sat alone at her desk as the halls emptied. Her fingers paused above her keyboard, a blank email draft displayed before her. The expression in Anthony Jefferson's eyes lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't anger, nor cruelty, simply disappointment, and a certainty as if he'd witnessed similar actions repeatedly and was weary of them. She replayed her words, not only those spoken to Malik, but those spoken near him about him. The sarcasm, the tone, the incredulity, they now reverberated, prominent and unwelcome. No reprimand had been issued. No public exposure had occurred. However, the sense of shame was genuine, and it remained. She closed the email without composing a reply. Later that evening, Malik was on the couch completing his homework when his dad entered the room. He loosened his tie and sat down next to him. "You conducted yourself admirably," Anthony remarked. Malik looked up. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't yield, you didn't recede, and that's significant," his father responded. Malik shut his notebook. "Why didn't you speak to her earlier?" he inquired. "I wanted you to develop your own voice initially," his father explained. However, when someone discredits your reputation in front of a group of people, it's no longer a subtle matter. It becomes a public affair. And I don't allow public disrespect to go unaddressed. Malik paused briefly. He observed that she appeared frightened, and she should have felt responsible. A period of silence followed, where they felt at ease and were being truthful. Subsequently, Malik's mom brought in dinner. The television displayed the evening news in the background. The school remained quiet. There were no announcements or public discussion, but the necessary events had transpired. The following day at school, an altered atmosphere prevailed. It wasn't a miraculous resolution, but a palpable shift. Mrs. Holbrook addressed the class with a more subdued demeanor. She refrained from excessive corrections or a manufactured apology, and the sharpness was absent from her voice. Her eyes no longer expressed frustration when Malik raised his hand. And when he briefly referred to his father in a writing assignment, she remained silent. Malik's classmates gave him more room. Some even showed him a quiet deference, not due to his father's identity, but because of how he had dealt with the situation. Calm, honest, steadfast. These were the qualities that resonated. However, even as the familiar patterns returned, one thing became evident. The truth had been disseminated, and the surrounding hush had finally ceased. The Monday following, the school hallways were as lively as they always were. The sound of sneakers on the floor, the clang of lockers, and the echoes of laughter filled the hallways. Yet, a subtle change had occurred, not only in room 204, but throughout the entire school. Students were no longer speaking about Malik in hushed tones. Instead, they observed him with a different kind of attention, not with the air of legend, not with the amusement of a shared joke, but with the recognition of someone who had faced a challenge head-on and remained steadfast. Malik walked through the hall with Bryce, as was their usual routine. But Bryce was the first to recognize it. Students seemed to make way a bit faster. Some even offered silent nods as they passed. It wasn't from fear, it was a sign of respect. It wasn't solely because Malik's dad held the office of mayor, it was Malik's own quiet confidence, which needed no justification. At lunchtime, Jasmine finally went to their table. "Hey," she said, holding her tray. Malik looked up. "Hi." Malik paused. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to laugh. I didn't think it was amusing. I don't know." He reassured her. "It's all right," he said. "Just, please don't participate next time." She acknowledged him, seeming slightly ashamed, and left. That's the nature of change. It doesn't always manifest as a significant event. Occasionally, it comes through uncomfortable dialogues and understated choices. Mrs. Holbrook never issued a formal apology. However, during the subsequent week, she began phrasing her inquiries differently. She included Malik more frequently. She smiled, but not with that rigid, artificial expression. It was presented in a manner suggesting an attempt at improvement, even without expressing it verbally. She also sent a handwritten, brief note home at the end of the week. Malik continues to contribute insight and maturity to the classroom. "Thank you for raising such a respectful young man." His father read it in the kitchen and remained silent. He simply handed it to Malik and offered a quiet nod of approval. In the weeks that followed, Malik's name was no longer solely connected to his father. Children began sharing stories about how he consistently provided the best answers in science class. They recalled how he assisted Ava in locating her missing library book. They noted how he defended a third grader who had dropped his tray in the lunchroom. The narrative concerning the mayor entering room 204 was, naturally, still recounted. However, it wasn't the humorous ending that resonated. It was the underlying message. That dignity carries more weight than loudness. That truth doesn't invariably require corroboration, but warrants acknowledgement. It's important that even a classroom, particularly a classroom, should not be a place where someone is told what they cannot be. Malik did not revisit the matter. He didn't need to. He demonstrated what needed demonstrating. His father had expressed what needed expressing, and the silence that previously attempted to overwhelm him had been broken. Several weeks later, during an assembly concerning leadership, the principal highlighted the significance of presence. She refrained from naming anyone, yet all those seated in the folding chairs understood the subject of her remarks. Prior to their departure that afternoon, Bryce turned to Malik and quietly said, "You know she was referencing you, correct?" Malik offered a slight shrug. "Perhaps." Bryce smiled. "The next occasion someone accuses you of dishonesty, I'm merely gesturing towards the door and anticipating your dad's arrival." Malik chuckled. No way. Next time, I'll address it personally. And he was sincere. While his dad had walked in that day to say what needed to be said, Malik had done something even harder. He stayed. He sat through the laughter, the whispers, the weight of being doubted. And he never faltered. And that kind of strength doesn't come from titles or headlines. It comes from knowing who you are, even when someone else tries to rewrite your story. Some bruises fade, but lessons, the ones worth remembering, they last a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who would benefit from hearing it. Stories like this are important, as respect, identity, and truth should never be compromised. Darius Whitfield arrived in a tailored suit, prepared to lead a major tech summit. However, hotel staff requested he wait outside. What followed had a significant impact on the entire company. It was just before 8 a.m. when Darius Whitfield exited his black Lincoln Continental onto the hotel's circular driveway in downtown San Jose. He adjusted the cuff of his navy blue suit jacket, the tailored fabric reflecting the morning light. He was impeccably dressed, with sharp lines, a crisp shirt, and Italian leather shoes. He exuded purpose and meticulousness, yet the valet remained still, not taking a single step. Darius held his keys casually in one hand and briefly looked over. The young man averted his gaze, feigning a check of his phone, then turned to the car behind Darius. "Hey, can you park this one?" The valet asked his coworker, gesturing past Darius without acknowledging him. Darius observed the glass doors of the hotel. They lacked prominent signage, no red carpet, just clean glass and a tranquil foyer. There was nothing to indicate what would happen within those walls. He retrieved his keys, parked his car himself, and walked across the drive. Upon opening the front door, he observed a slight change in the concierge's smile. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "Can I help you?" The woman at the front desk inquired without looking up. "Yes," Darius replied. "I'm here for the SummitNet conference. I believe you have a Redwood room reserved for us." The woman quickly examined his face, frowned, and then looked back at her screen. "Do you work for one of the vendors?" she asked. "No, I'm the CEO." She blinked. "Right. Could you wait outside for a moment? We're still prepping the space." He paused. "I'm also the keynote speaker." There was no apology, no moment of realization. Just a tight smile and a firm response. "Still, we're not quite ready. Please wait outside." A colleague, a young man wearing a blazer and with a walkie-talkie attached to his belt, emerged behind her. He scrutinized Darius from head to toe, as if verifying his credentials. "Are you with security?" he inquired, speaking quietly. "I am Darius Whitfield." Darius responded calmly. "The conference you're holding today? I manage it." A brief pause. The man then angled his head towards the entrance. "Please wait a moment, sir. We will find someone to escort you." Darius exhaled slowly and deliberately. Attendees began to gather. Several initial investors were among the first to arrive. A white man wearing a gray plaid suit was immediately met with handshakes and friendly expressions. He wasn't asked to wait in the lobby. Darius noticed him, but the man seemed to hardly acknowledge him and proceeded through the lobby, accompanied by the same staff who had previously requested Darius to wait outside. The hotel doors closed behind him with a quiet hiss. Darius now stood again just outside the main entrance on the pavement. He glanced at his watch. The time read 8:09. His presentation wasn't scheduled for another 51 minutes. He possessed time. However, an unsettling sensation stirred within him. It wasn't anger, it was something more profound. Across the street, a mother guided a stroller toward the coffee shop. A bus emitted a hiss as it halted at the corner. Life continued its course, and yet Darius remained stationary. A mature man who had established a company from its foundation, feeling as though he was an outsider due to his appearance not aligning with preconceived notions. His phone vibrated in his pocket. "Boss," the voice of his assistant, Jalen, spoke. "Just checking. Did they greet you yet?" Darius stared at the hotel doors, his tone calm. "Not exactly. But that's when something shifted. Not in them, but in him." Jalen was still on the line, his voice low but alert. "What do you mean, not exactly?" Darius replied. "They asked me to wait outside." There was a pause, not shock, not disbelief, just silence. Jalen knew from his time working with Darius that his measured, toneless speech indicated more than just a report. He was analyzing and organizing the information. Wanting to come down? Jalen inquired. No, Darius replied. Stay with the investors. They'll be arriving within the next 15 minutes. Let me manage this. He ended the call, adjusted his tie, and returned through the doors. Inside, the same woman at the front desk noticed him, but her expression remained unchanged. I believed I requested you wait outside, sir, she stated, inputting information on the keyboard. And I did wait, Darius said directly. Now, I wish to speak with the event coordinator. My name is Darius Whitfield. I am the founder and CEO of Whitfield Dynamics. We reserve the Redwood Room and 2 floors of your suites for this conference. This time, she made direct eye contact with him. However, there was no apology offered, just a brief hesitation, as if she was assessing whether this was a joke. Mr. Whitmore, was it? Whitfield. A pause. She turned to the young man in the blazer. Can you call Gina from events? The man nodded and walked off. Simultaneously, a bellhop wheeled by with a luggage cart stacked with briefcases. Darius stepped aside and caught a glimpse of 2 of his board members stepping out of the elevator, each with branded SummitNet conference badges clipped to their suits. They greeted a hotel manager who seemed to have appeared suddenly to shake their hands. Darius subtly raised a hand, seeking acknowledgement. The manager briefly looked at him, paused, and then looked away. Ma'am, Darius stated calmly, refocusing on the front desk. Let me repeat this. I'm not a guest. I'm not affiliated with security. I'm not making a delivery. I'm the cause of these people being here. I orchestrated this entire summit. I brought 60 of the most influential investors in West Coast tech into this building today. The woman began to speak, but the man holding the walkie-talkie returned before she could utter a word. She's on her way, he announced. Following a brief silence, he inquired, You're really the CEO? Darius offered a subtle smile. I didn't just build this company, I financed it. I wrote the first line of code. I signed a contract with this hotel. And I chose this location because I believed in the idea of professional courtesy. Both individuals looked at him. He continued, I've got $5 billion under management. I was nearly ready to believe you could assist with that. The ensuing quiet felt unusual. It wasn't a reaction of doubt. It was awkwardness. The woman at the reception desk moved, appearing hesitant. Before she could respond, Gina from events entered the lobby quickly, carrying a folder and already speaking. Mr. Whitfield, I sincerely apologize for the delay. We weren't notified of your arrival. Please come with me. The Redwood Room is prepared and coffee is being served. The investors are already assembling. The same staff who had requested he step outside now retreated, as if dividing water. Darius followed Gina past the desk, past the man with the walkie-talkie, and past the woman whose face was flushed now. Whether from embarrassment or an unknown reason, he remained silent. Explanation was unnecessary, because their misunderstanding wasn't a man attempting to enter a place where he wasn't welcome. What they overlooked, what they were unwilling to acknowledge, was a man who held ownership of the space. Remaining silent, allowing them the opportunity to adjust their actions, they did not. However, what followed would not be a demonstration of anger. Instead, it would serve as a lesson in remembrance, and Darius possessed a remarkable memory. The Redwood Room was located at the rear of the hotel's conference wing, beyond a hallway adorned with abstract artwork and subdued carpeting. Within, the lighting had been lowered in preparation for the initial presentation. Chairs were arranged in rows, a podium displayed the SummitNet logo, and a side table held bottled water and elegant name placards. Darius quickly surveyed the room. Jalen was positioned at the front, adjusting sound levels with the AV technician. Investors were arriving, engaging in hushed conversations over coffee. Unbeknownst to everyone, something had occurred in the lobby. He didn't proceed to the podium, not yet. Instead, he entered a side room, the private lounge reserved for speakers, and shut the door. He then retrieved his phone. Tammy, he exclaimed as his head of operations answered. We're moving the summit. There was no surprise audible on the other end, Tammy was accustomed to this manner of communication. Today, she inquired. Right now, he replied. You want to relocate 50 people with less than an hour's notice? Not want. Need, he corrected. She refrained from questioning further. You want me to call the Fairmont or the Hayes? Hayes, he stated. I want every investor redirected there. Make sure they understand this isn't a scheduling issue. It's a matter of principle. I will provide further details when appropriate. Please cancel the remainder of our reservation at Willow Creek Manor. Suites were included. If there's resistance to releasing the booking, please charge any associated penalties to me directly. Tammy released a slow breath. Acknowledged. Contact Jalen as well. Instruct him to postpone the opening and redirect the guests. Subsequently, Darius concluded the call. There was no raised voices, no abrupt phone placement, only decisive action, efficient and straightforward. He observed his image reflected in the lounge's dark glass window. He felt neither justified nor triumphant. He simply felt weary. Weary of entering spaces where people perceived everything about him except his true self. A gentle knock sounded. It was Jalen. Shall we review the slides? Darius declined. Plans have changed. Jalen looked surprised. Are we departing? I'm already handling it. It took a moment, but then Jalen understood. They hadn't attempted to rectify the situation. Had they? No. Should I inform the board? I'm taking care of it directly. Please ensure the guests proceed. No one was to acknowledge the hotel on departure. Within minutes, Jalen was discreetly communicating the situation through subtle handshakes and nods. Emergency relocation, he murmured to one group. We've got a superior setup just a few blocks over, he informed another. Mr. Whitfield will provide details. Simultaneously, Tammy was contacting the Hayes, securing their backup venue, arranging staff, transferring AV equipment, and lunch catering. Darius revisited the Redwood room a single time, returning to retrieve his notes and laptop. A hotel manager then emerged, his expression strained, holding a folder. Mr. Whitfield, I'm informed there was an error at the front desk earlier today, and I want to offer a personal apology. It was never our aim to cause offense. Darius interjected smoothly. You simply demonstrated a lack of standards. This isn't a matter of pride. It's about expectations. The manager appeared taken aback. Is there a way we can rectify this? Darius closed his laptop case and looked at him. You had your chance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The only thing louder than outrage is absence. The room, moments earlier filled with leading investors, was emptying quickly. As Darius left through the same lobby where he's been instructed to wait, he noticed the desk clerk watching him, her lips pressed tightly. The young man with the walkie-talkie had disappeared. He continued walking. A black SUV was waiting outside. The driver opened the door. Darius got in, his phone already ringing. However, this wasn't the conclusion of the day's events. It was merely the point at which others began to arrive. When the first tray of croissants reached the now half-empty Redwood room, most of the guests had already departed, assembling in the grand atrium of the Hayes, San Jose's other luxury hotel. The staff at that location required no introduction to Darius. The reception gave him a welcome as if they had anticipated this for weeks. Simultaneously, at the initial hotel, the front desk staff appeared perplexed. The receptionist repeatedly examined her screen, reviewing the guest list and then the room blocks. A puzzled expression crossed her face as she reached for the phone. Gina, she said, the conference guests are departing. Gina, the events coordinator, was in the loading bay assisting the AV team in packing up equipment. What do you mean leaving? She inquired. I mean guests are checking out. Access was being revoked. Several individuals simply departed without comment. Within fewer than 20 minutes, the lobby, previously bustling with greetings and business cards, showed noticeable absences. Conference signs remained in place, but the atmosphere dissipated quickly. Then the manager received a phone call. Sir, the company has terminated all reservations. He appeared stunned. That's impossible. It's summit day. But it was, in fact, possible. The situation unfolded rapidly. Calls began pouring in. The front desk clerk appeared panicked, attempting to get the manager's attention while also handling a call from housekeeping. A guest had just departed without notification, according to reports. Another client stated they would not be paying for today's brunch. Refer them to Mr. Whitfield, someone else added. A security guard then approached the manager. That SUV outside? It transported him and several others. They're no longer present. The shift felt like a chain reaction, with one problem triggering another. Without any outbursts or blame, there was simply a disappearance. At the Hays, Darius addressed the group, standing before a large projection screen in a bright conference room. He spoke deliberately and plainly, showing no indication of resentment. Before we start, I'd like to express my gratitude for your adaptability. I understand the change of location was unforeseen, but I think the place we meet reflects what we prioritize. A quiet acknowledgement rippled through the room. I selected that previous hotel due to its reputation, the quality of its service, and its convenient location near your offices. However, this morning, I was reminded that a refined lobby and a 5-star rating do not ensure courtesy. He paused. I was requested to wait outside, twice, by staff who did not once inquire about my name. I parked my own vehicle. I reintroduced myself. I clarified my identity. Yet in that environment, none of it seemed significant. A few expressions grew strained. Heads shook. Some of you may be surprised by this. Others, perhaps not. He paused briefly. However, I don't endorse raising voices. I don't endorse diminishing others simply to demonstrate a point. I endorse progress. And today, we are making progress. To a location that acknowledges us, listens to us, and handles our business with the appropriate level of importance. The audience responded with applause, motivated by esteem, not sympathy. In the rear, Jalen observed, arms crossed, exhibiting pride. Simultaneously, at the initial hotel, the conference signage was being removed. Maintenance personnel removed untouched coffee urns. A catering team remained still, observing the scene and uncertain whether to start preparing the food. The manager examined a document he held. It was a formal notification from Whitfield Dynamics, ending their agreement, effective immediately. There would be no legal action or demands, only a straightforward severance payment and a significant financial cost. He contacted the general manager. We're out of the event, he stated. How? The general manager asked. The unidentified guest was the event itself. While the hotel attempted to address what it had overlooked, Darius was poised to reveal a previously unknown aspect of his own history. The day progressed into the late afternoon. The sun cast long shadows across the street as Darius sat in the back seat of the SUV, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. He had removed his tie, revealing the open collar of a white shirt, and a weary expression filled his eyes. Jalen sat beside him, reviewing emails on his tablet. Are you certain you don't want me to draft a public statement? Jalen inquired. People are already beginning to post. Someone from Marlowe and Banks recorded a video of you exiting. Darius declined. Let them speak. I am not trying to become popular online. He reclined against the seat. The engine emitted a low hum. Outside, children cycled along the sidewalk, their laughter echoing. A woman wearing a red jacket assisted an elderly gentleman from a rideshare and into a small dental office. It was unremarkable, simply the day proceeding as usual. A sense of heaviness filled the car. Can I ask you something? Jalen asked, without lifting his gaze. Go ahead. Why didn't you just confront them? He continued. They deserved it, considering everything. Darius hesitated before responding, his gaze fixed on the window. Finally, he said, when I was 19, I attended my first interview with a resume detailing summer jobs and a GPA that promised opportunity. The receptionist inquired if I was delivering food. I smiled, confirmed that I wasn't, and waited 2 hours. The interview was never scheduled. It was an oversight. I was present and observed. Jalen looked around, remaining silent. I had the option to create a disturbance, to draw attention, but I chose not to. I departed, seeking alternative exits, finding another, and then another. He moved his hands together, as though recalling the sensation of a steering wheel from years ago. For a significant portion of my life, I believe that achieving certain milestones, accumulating degrees, wealth, and professional attire, would dispel certain preconceptions, he glanced towards Jalen. Jalen nodded slowly. It wasn't simply another receptionist. It was a complete hotel, a defining moment. Exactly, Darius affirmed. That's why I left. Because I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't require them to understand. I needed the observers to witness what it appears like when you decline to plead for respect that you have already earned. He exhaled, looking out the window again. My father used to say, you can't force people to see you, but you can choose where you won't be invisible. Jalen relaxed against the seat, allowing the thought to linger. The vehicle paused at a traffic signal. Directly ahead, a billboard displayed an advertisement for a startup accelerator. It featured youthful faces, modern logos, and vibrant colors. Jalen smiled. You ever imagine we would be the ones leading those programs, rather than seeking acceptance into them? Darius chuckled. Every day, and it still feels unreal occasionally. The SUV came to a halt before the Whitfield Dynamics building, a structure of glass, steel, and understated confidence. Upon exiting, the lobby receptionist waved, already summoning the elevator. During the ascent, Jalen initiated conversation. Have you ever considered sharing that story? He asked. The 19-year-old version? Darius replied, perhaps. Not seeking sympathy, but for clarity, because people often assume these incidents are isolated events. A single bad day, a single impolite employee. However, it's rarely about a solitary moment. It's about recurring patterns, repeated, honed, and concealed. He disembarked the elevator, briefcase in his grasp. Addressing problems requires acknowledgement, but it's also possible to demonstrate how to disengage with grace. What Darius didn't understand was that his actions, his silent resistance, were quickly gaining wider attention. The consequences began subtly. They didn't appear in news reports. There was no public condemnation. Instead, there were hushed conversations in meeting rooms. Then, a few emails circulated. By midweek, 3 other companies had discreetly canceled their reservations at the same hotel. There were no official declarations. No demonstrations. We're shifting our strategy. However, the discussions were very specific. Are you aware of what occurred with the Whitfield Dynamics team? We cannot accept that level of risk associated with our reputation. Could you remind me of the alternative venue? The hotel attempted to repair the situation. A regional sales director contacted Whitfield Dynamics, proposing complimentary bookings for the upcoming quarter, complimentary executive suites, and even spa credits for visiting investors. The proposal was not approved. Tammy reviewed it, then closed and marked the email as resolved. Darius did not respond, as trust, once broken, cannot be restored with price reductions. This wasn't a matter of incorrect charges. It concerned the events permitted under supervision. Simultaneously, news of the relocation reached media outlets. A technology news source reported on the sequence of events. It was not a critical piece, but rather a recounting of the timeline, the events, the individuals who witnessed them, and the change in location. A quiet, thoughtful pause followed. However, the narrative circulated through email accounts, then in messaging apps, and ultimately during after-work gatherings where young Black professionals toasted Darius Whitfield. Not for his response, but for his restraint. Because occasionally, the most impactful action isn't a forceful reaction. It's disengaging, as if the situation wasn't worthy of your presence. The Whitfield Dynamics office was silent as Darius presided over a boardroom meeting. He sat at the head of the table, accompanied by 4 senior staff members and 3 partners from a private equity group based in Seattle. An investor spoke, commenting, "We've heard about the switch. People are still discussing it." Darius shifted back a little. "Is that a concern for you?" inquired one of the investors. "Not at all," the man replied. "It actually conveyed more about your leadership style than the slide deck ever did," another investor added. Few possess that level of composure when facing intense situations. That's the basis of trust. Darius offered a subtle acknowledgement, refraining from any display of triumph. The focus wasn't about victory. It was about adhering to fair practices from the outset. Later that evening, he walked the quiet floor of the office, pausing to observe a whiteboard covered with written diagrams sticky notes, and equations. Jalen was present as well, drinking from a chipped mug. Did you review the report? He inquired. Yes, I did. The detail about the valet's actions was omitted, Darius noted. They always leave something out, he said. Doesn't matter, Jalen added. People understand the situation. Those who needed to know received the message. Darius reviewed the whiteboard. When we constructed this establishment, I didn't desire it to be ostentatious. I didn't want visitors to feel impressed. I wanted them to feel acknowledged. That's the key distinction, Jalen affirmed. Do they see you now? Darius responded softly. They always recognized me. They simply never anticipated I would be the one authorizing the payments. He turned toward his office, extinguished the lights, and hesitated in the doorway. Let's continue building, he stated. However, before he departed for the evening, there was one more individual Darius needed to speak with, someone who served as a reminder of the importance of moments such as this. The following morning, Darius stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, holding a newly brewed mug of black coffee. The sky appeared as a flat silver, creating a sense of quietness and distance. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Come in, he replied without turning. The door opened. A young man entered. This was Elijah Green, in his mid-20s, intelligent but still inexperienced, a junior analyst at Whitefield Dynamics. He held a folder, seeming hesitant about the timing. You said you wanted to meet? Elijah inquired. Darius turned, offering a brief nod and indicating the chair opposite him. Elijah took a seat, placing the folder on his lap without opening it. His gaze shifted, suggesting uncertainty about where to start. I'm aware of what occurred at the hotel, he finally stated. Some of us were discussing it in the lunchroom yesterday. Darius remained silent, allowing the quiet to linger, not awkwardly, but calmly. I suppose I simply wanted to inquire. How do you manage to not be affected by it? Elijah asked. How do you keep your composure when it's so apparent? Darius offered a slight smile. Do you imagine I remain composed? Elijah hesitated. Didn't I? No, that usually played. I simply didn't reveal it. He placed his coffee down. You know what they perceived when I entered that hotel. A man present in a location they didn't anticipate. Nothing else held significance. Not the professional obligations, not the agreements, not the convention. Only their own conception of what authority embodies and who doesn't align with it. Elijah moved closer. Then why not challenge them? Why not expose them publicly? Because the world is already aware, Darius explained. That's not the core issue. The true challenge lies in demonstrating to future generations that you don't require their validation to take action. You don't need their authorization to feel like you belong, Elijah affirmed thoughtfully. You navigated the situation with composure, he commented. If it had been me, I'm unsure, Darius continued. That's the key point. You don't need certainty. You simply need to retain this understanding. Don't sacrifice your dignity because of another person's lack of understanding. If they misunderstand you, allow it. However, ensure the foundation you're establishing for yourself, your company, your name, and your team creates a sense of inclusivity for everyone. Elijah paused, the sentiment resonating more deeply than anticipated. That's the essence of leadership, Darius stated. It's not about reacting aggressively. It's about creating opportunities elsewhere. A brief silence followed. Then Darius moved closer. Now what's in here? He asked, gesturing to the folder Elijah had brought. Oh, right, Elijah responded, seeming to refocus. It's a new proposal from the behavioral data team. We're incorporating changes based on your feedback from last week. Darius opened the folder and quickly reviewed the first page. Excellent. Let's schedule a meeting with the team this afternoon. Elijah started to leave, pausing at the doorway. Thank you, he said. For what? Darius replied, for showing us how to progress. He acknowledged Elijah with a subtle nod. Elijah departed the room. Outside, traffic flowed consistently, as if the world remained oblivious to what had transpired. However, those who had observed would not easily forget. This extended beyond a single man and one hotel. It encompassed all the rooms people enter where someone perceives only a partial truth. It was about the subtle ways authority can exert itself, through initiative, not response. and it concerned altering the established order without accepting the tools offered. If this narrative resonated with you deeply, if it prompted reflection on how you navigate environments not designed for you, please discuss it. Share your thoughts. And remember to subscribe to receive more true stories demonstrating the remarkable power of quiet strength. She was simply known as the janitor. They ridiculed her for reading while she worked. Then they were stunned when she delivered the valedictorian speech at graduation, revealing everything. At Larchmont Hills Academy, everyone recognized Olivia Cranston and Camille Strathmore. It was understood. They were the daughters of families who traveled by private plane and ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. Their presence in a room prompted people to either rise or avert their gaze, a reaction born of habit, fear, or envy. They weren't malicious, not precisely, but they understood early on that kindness wasn't essential. Politeness was a choice. Deference? It was reserved for individuals who could provide something in return. And for someone like Janice Albury, the reserved black woman with gentle eyes and rough hands, there was no advantage to be found. Janice had been employed at the school for nearly 2 years. Each weekday, she arrived before sunrise and departed well after the final SUV had exited the gated parking lot. She scrubbed the floors, shined the trophies in the main hall, and ensured the restrooms were fresh. She seldom spoke unless addressed, and her voice, when she did, was as tranquil as a still pond. But Camille observed something one day during lunch break. She had forgotten her phone in the chemistry lab, and hurrying back, she noticed Janice in an empty classroom, not tidying, but looking through a large biology textbook, her lips moving as if saying something softly. Camille rested against the door frame and smiled. "I didn't think you were interested in science," she said. Janice looked up. "I'm just reviewing some earlier learning." Camille angled her head. "Are you going to teach now, as well?" Janice smiled. "Not precisely." It began modestly. There were whispered comments and laughter when Janice walked by. Camille told Olivia, and the two created a playful game from it. "Oh, look," Olivia whispered one morning as Janice wheeled her cart past their lunch table. "Einstein with a mop," Camille chuckled. "Probably writing her thesis on floor wax." They laughed a little too loudly. Other students overheard. Some laughed with them. Others avoided eye contact. No one intervened. Janice kept her head down. It was her usual practice. The students overlooked the way her eyes paused on the school crest etched into the wall, her gaze thoughtful rather than resentful. They failed to observe her tendency to listen more than to speak, or her habit of keeping a notebook in the side pocket of her cart, partially filled with notes. One person showed her kindness. Mr. Del Toro, a literature teacher from Fresno who had a fondness for those often overlooked. On one occasion, he observed Janice carefully aligning the copies of To Kill a Mockingbird on a cart just outside his classroom. "You know," he remarked, "most people simply stack them and proceed." Janice offered a slight shrug. "That book warrants more than crooked edges," she said. He chuckled. "I often say that," he stated, then paused. "Have you read it?" Janice responded to his question. "Twice. Initially in high school, and subsequently when I was mature enough to grasp its true significance." He never requested anything further, but from that point forward he would leave a book for her on the bench outside the staff room every other Friday. No message, no inquiries. Nevertheless, the girls persisted. One afternoon, Olivia waited until Janice passed by, then whispered, "I bet she sleeps in the janitor's closet. Probably dreams in Clorox." It wasn't simply impolite, it was unkind. But Janice continued walking, and that disturbed Olivia more than anything. She anticipated embarrassment or anger, or at the very least a reaction. Janice's silence, however, felt inescapable. This made her a figure to be reckoned with. The lights at Northwood High typically dimmed around 8 p.m. Most evenings, though a few always remained lit, sufficient to create long shadows across the marble corridors. It was during these hours that Janice seemed to transform. As the classrooms fell silent and the usual teenage bustle subsided, she would move her cart into the supply closet, change into a clean shirt, and bring her notebook to room 114. Room 114 was no longer designated for a specific class. It had a flickering light and one desk leg shorter than the others. Most teachers steered clear of it. However, Janice had adopted it. The door did not lock, and that was acceptable. She didn't require privacy. She simply needed space. She would retrieve her laptop, a 6-year-old Dell lacking the N key, and sign into her coursework. She was 6 credits shy of finishing a degree in educational leadership through an accelerated adult program offered by the same university that operated Larchmont Hills Academy. A small, understated provision located within the staff handbook provided full scholarships to employees who worked a minimum of 30 hours a week. Most staff members overlooked it. Janice had not. It wasn't about ambition at this point. The focus was on completing a project that had been halted years prior. This was a time when she possessed a child, a husband, and a secure job in Maryland, only to lose all 3 within 18 months. Life has a way of deflating you before you're aware you've been holding your breath. She never expressed her struggles to anyone. It wasn't a behavior she'd been taught. Occasionally, late at night, she would receive a message from her sister in Detroit. "You sleeping or still playing superhero?" Janice would respond with a photo of her textbook and a brief message. Chapter 6 is proving difficult. Her sister would then send a laughing emoji, followed by, "You're still the smartest person I know. Don't let those stuck-up girls get to you." She never shared with her sister the full extent of the difficulties. She omitted the incident where Camille accidentally knocked over the bucket of dirty water and seemed to find amusement as Janice knelt to clean it. There was also the incident when Olivia confided in a group of parents during a school tour, suggesting the institution favored hiring individuals with charitable backgrounds. Yet, Janice persisted. She consistently arrived 5 minutes early. Her cart was always spotless, her uniform immaculate. She possessed patience but lacked innocence. Her understanding of the school's customs surpassed that of the students. Beneath the refined wooden interiors and carefully selected diversity pamphlets, there existed a decay. Not everyone, naturally, but sufficiently pervasive to permeate the atmosphere. Janice had no intention of rectifying it. Her task was simple: observe, listen, and document. Unbeknownst to the students, and even the staff, Janice had been selected for a role extending beyond cleaning floors. 2 years prior, following an internal report alleging the Academy's neglect of racial and economic discrimination, the Board of Trustees approved a discreet strategy. They decided to place someone within the school, silently. Someone who wouldn't attract attention. Someone who could witness everything. While working part-time at a community college in Oakland, Janice received a job offer. The position came with no title or special privileges, simply an ID badge, a mop, and a defined purpose. That purpose was to observe, to take notes, and to document the patterns of behavior that were not able to be captured in policy memos or camera footage. The work was not glamorous. However, it was significant. And late at night, with her coursework open in one window and her field notes in another, Janice recorded everything. It wasn't only the cruelty, but the indifference, the smiles that vanished the moment someone turned away. She also wrote about the good teachers, the limited number of students who met her gaze. She recalled how Mr. Del Toro left that copy of Beloved with a sticky note that said, "For someone who understands silence." Still, each shift drained her, not from the labor itself, but from a necessity of feigning. She bore their ignorance as a second uniform, and with each passing day, it became increasingly burdensome. A change was on the horizon, though not as they anticipated. By early spring, the students at Larchmont Hills Academy were already largely disengaged. Señoritas had arrived gradually, like a dense fog, subtle, pervasive, and self-satisfied. Olivia and Camille frequently spent their days in the senior lounge, examining college acceptance emails and making critical remarks about those they perceived as inferior. However, subtle comments were no longer sufficient. The initial excitement had faded. They desired a significant reaction. On a Monday morning, Camille entered the admin office and pretended to be worried. "I think the janitor's been stealing test copies," she whispered to the front desk clerk, making her voice sound very low. I saw her in a classroom late at night, alone. Ms. Robbins looked surprised. Janice, are you certain? Camille adopted her most innocent expression. I don't want to cause problems for anyone, but this school is supposed to be secure, isn't it? It was a carefully planned action. If anything resulted from it, so much the better. A sense of unease lingered. That afternoon, Janice was summoned to the operations office. The interaction was presented as a standard procedure with no direct accusations. She remained composed as the facility's manager reviewed his notes, visibly ill at ease. We simply wanted to inquire if you've been present in unoccupied classrooms during your shift, he stated. I clean all classrooms assigned to me. Janice responded directly. Yes, but do you remain longer? For any purpose? He maintained eye contact. I complete my assigned tasks. Occasionally, I require a brief respite, as do most people. He acknowledged this with a nod and made a note. Very well, that concludes the discussion. Janice rose. Should any questions arise regarding my work, I would welcome a straightforward discussion. The gentleman's cheeks flushed slightly. There are no concerns. Simply, you understand procedure. It was a flimsy fabrication, and both were aware of it. Outside the office, Janice located Camille resting against the wall, feigning interest in her phone. The smile offered was not amicable. Everything satisfactory, Miss Albury? Her tone was saccharine. Janice remained unmoved. It was more effective than one might expect. Camille's face faltered briefly, then quickly returned to its characteristic sneer. However, this was no longer a trivial matter. Camille and Olivia had matured observing individuals evade consequences. This fostered their confidence and impulsiveness. 2 days elapsed before Olivia planned a further incident. She let a silver necklace fall near the janitor's closet and then dramatically announced its disappearance from her locker during lunch. A small crowd assembled. She raised her wrist in a theatrical gesture. I'm certain I had it in there earlier today, she declared. I suppose it could be lost permanently, Camille observed. Their friends chuckled, some visibly anxious. Perhaps check the mop bucket, they joked. However, when one of the admin staff overheard the remark and volunteered to investigate, Olivia quickly recanted. No, I'm sure I simply misplaced it. It's nothing significant, she said. The immediate concern subsided, but the awkwardness remained. That evening, Mr. Del Toro walked past Janice in the hallway. He stopped. You're doing okay, he said. Janice looked up from her card. You've been here long enough to know the games these kids play, he sighed. Too long sometimes. There was a pause. Is there anything I can do? She thought for a moment. Keep doing what you're doing. That's rare enough. What neither of them knew, what no one knew, was that Janice had already sent her first internal report to the board. Documented dates, quotes, and behavior patterns were observed. Names redacted for now, but she wasn't the only one being monitored anymore. An independent firm had initiated discrete audits. These audits included interviews and surveys presented as student engagement questionnaires. Camille and Olivia believed they had complete control over the school, but attention was shifting. Rumors began to change their focus. Despite this, the girls continued their actions. Cruelty had developed into a pattern, and patterns are difficult to change when they have never faced repercussions. Then, one Friday, Janice heard something that stopped her. In the lounge, behind a cracked door, Camille was speaking to a boy from the tennis team. You know that janitor, Janice? She said. My mom says people like her are just here to make the place look diverse. She referred to it as optics. The boy laughed. Olivia added, my dad said the school's bleeding money giving those scholarship perks to staff. It's basically charity, Camille scoffed. Unable to repair the situation with books, Janice stood quietly, 1 foot still in the hallway, one hand gripping the edge of her cart. She said nothing, but something within her shifted. She had been patient long enough, but now she had everything she needed, and it was almost time to show them. Before she was sweeping floors under fluorescent lights, Janice Albury had been someone else entirely. 12 years prior, she held the position of Director of Curriculum Development for a public school district in Maryland, known then as Janice Simmons. Her responsibilities included managing a corner office, overseeing 3 staff members, and proudly displaying a plaque from the state superintendent. She was married and a mother. Life at that time possessed a sense of order and comfort. However, that changed with a tragic event. Her husband Carr was struck by a delivery truck on I-83 during a snowstorm. He perished in the accident. Her daughter, Kira, who was 6 years old at the time, survived, though with significant injuries. After 2 months spent in a hospital bed, Janice faced a year of surgeries and rehabilitation. While insurance covered a significant portion of the expenses, some costs remained. Janice drew upon her savings, her retirement funds, and ultimately sold their home. Following this, Kira developed pneumonia, which tragically led to her passing. Janice resigned from her job 2 weeks following the funeral. The sight of a school brought back the image of Kira's empty chair, and the sound of children's laughter in the hallways served as a painful reminder of her loss. She moved around, taking temporary work, staying with friends, then in rented rooms, ultimately settling into a small studio apartment in Antioch, California. Despite these changes, she consistently read and continued learning. This pursuit led her to discover a program, a little-known educational equity initiative offered through a university partnership, representing a fresh opportunity. When asked if she would agree to work undercover to examine behavioral differences between students from privileged backgrounds and faculty perspectives, she readily accepted. She acted not out of financial need, but because the system had let down too many individuals resembling her. She refused to accept this inaction. Applying for the janitorial position using her maiden name, she successfully completed the background checks, keeping her degree and credentials secured in a folder at home. Initially, her goal was simply to observe and listen, to remain unnoticed. She had no plan to participate. The incidents she witnessed were disheartening. A senior teacher deriding a student with a speech impediment under the assumption of privacy. Discussions about a girl's financial aid occurred at a staff meeting, presented as a personal failing. Then there were Camille and Olivia, whose parents' substantial donations had secured the gymnasium's naming rights in honor of a hedge fund. Their self-assurance stemmed not from conceit, but from a sense of privilege. Janice felt disheartened by what she observed. Eleanor Larchmont, the school's founder, had originally conceived of the academy as a place for future leaders from all backgrounds. However, that original vision had diminished over time, obscured by financial influence, promotional efforts, and preferential admissions practices. Consequently, Janice began her work. Her notebook rapidly filled with detailed observations, specific dates, recurring linguistic patterns, staff reactions. She consistently attended faculty meetings when possible, choosing to sit in the rear of the room. She posed inquiries that prompted discomfort among those present. She took on committee assignments that others avoided. Steadily and carefully, she became the source of information the board required. And during evenings, as the halls became vacant, she studied. She wasn't simply observing, she was revitalizing herself. Each finished module advanced her progress toward that second degree. Each submitted essay felt like rediscovering a part of the woman she once was. During one evening spent reviewing a case study about institutional gatekeeping, a particular sentence caught her attention. It stated that genuine authority doesn't proclaim itself, it waits to be recognized. She emphasized this line with underlines. Graduation was approaching rapidly, just 3 weeks away. She had finished the program without drawing much attention. Her grade point average ranked her among the highest in her group. The board had previously approved her to address the audience. Camille and Olivia continued to walk through the halls with an air of confidence, unaware of what was about to unfold. The faculty, too, were on the verge of a realization that learning extends beyond the classroom. Janice had observed them for 2 years. Now, she was poised to step forward, taking the central position, and they would be completely surprised. That morning, the sky above Antioch was clear, excessively bright considering the anxiety some individuals brought into the Larchmont Hills Academy Auditorium. Families occupied the seats, proud parents filled with anticipation and clutching phones, surrounded by flowers, ties, and costly perfume. The scene appeared flawless. Camille Strathmore wore a champagne-colored stole that her mother had flown in from France. Olivia Cranston had her hair professionally styled before dawn, her makeup applied to endure the entire day. They smiled for photographs, laughed with joy, and stood with the grace of young women who'd been raised to believe the world was within their reach. Behind the scenes, Janice remained still in her black robe. There were no embellishments, no unnecessary details. She declined the academic award the committee presented, stating she had no need for it. What she desired was a single moment, just one, and that moment had arrived. The dean, Dr. Leonard, approached her, holding a program. "Ready, Ms. Albury?" She met his gaze. She had been prepared. He offered a restrained smile and returned toward the podium. Camille and Olivia did not even look at her as they passed by in their elegant gowns. It was understandable. She was unnoticed once more, simply an element of the surroundings. The ceremony commenced as it always did. Names were announced, families applauded, and speeches were delivered. The school's jazz trio performed something gentle and unremarkable. Subsequently, Dr. Leonard approached the microphone. "As we approach the end of this year's commencement, we have a particularly noteworthy announcement, one that, intentionally, has remained private until this moment." Students adjusted in their seats. Parents moved closer. Even faculty appeared puzzled. This year, the Board of Trustees authorized a confidential academic pilot program meant to enable working staff at our institution to pursue higher education with complete anonymity. The program demands both academic excellence and professional integrity of the highest order. Camille glanced at Olivia. Olivia showed a frown. Murmurs began behind them. Dr. Leonard proceeded. "We are pleased to announce that the highest academic honor this year goes not to a student you might have learned alongside, but to someone many of you overlooked." He paused, then stated distinctly, "Please welcome Janice Albury, this year's valedictorian." A stillness hung in the air. Then, with a suddenness like a glass shattering in a quiet room, the news arrived. People turned their heads, their mouths agape. Camille remained motionless, her expression rigid. Olivia blinked, then attempted a laugh, only to find herself laughing alone. Janice proceeded deliberately to the stage. Her movements were controlled, her posture upright. She avoided looking at the assembled group until she reached the podium. Then, she surveyed the audience slowly, her gaze finally fixing on Camille and Olivia. Following this, she began to speak. "I arrived at this school with a mop in one hand and a question lingering in my thoughts." Her voice resonated, strong and clear, without any doubt. "I found myself questioning the true nature of this institution. Beyond the official statistics, the promotional materials, and the presentations, I wanted to determine if respect was readily available here, or if it was something that needed to be gained only by those who possessed the appropriate attire, footwear, and family names." The auditorium was completely silent. I dedicated countless evenings tidying up after those who spoke negatively about me. And when they observed me reading a book or attending a classroom session after hours, they mocked. She paused. However, my focus extended beyond mere reading. I was observing, studying, not solely to earn a degree, but to uncover solutions. She turned slightly toward the faculty, and now I possessed them. Students surveyed the room, adjusting in their places. Olivia's expression remained inscrutable. Camille clutched her program firmly, her knuckles white. Janice lifted her chin. "I stand here today, not just as your valedictorian, but as a reflection of the very things that Elmwood High claims to stand for: growth, opportunity, and truth." But she hadn't revealed everything yet, and what she said next would change the room forever. You could hear a cough from 3 rows back. A chair creaked. A phone buzzed quietly against someone's hip, but no one moved to check it. A hush fell over the room as people leaned in, anticipating Janice's next words. She proceeded deliberately, taking a drink of water, briefly reviewing her notes, and neatly folding them. Then, she raised her gaze. "I'm sure some of you are wondering how I came to be here," she began, gesturing to her robe and the podium. A few members of the front row, largely faculty, nodded in agreement, seemingly unaware they had done so. My presence here wasn't solely for the purpose of earning a degree, she added. 2 years ago, the university board contacted me following concerns raised, discreetly, privately, regarding the increasing atmosphere of class division and privilege within Ashworth Academy. They requested I consider a position, but not as a faculty member, not as a consultant, as a janitor. At this, the room shifted. Janice allowed the silence to linger. My purpose was to observe. Away from executive suites and scheduled gatherings, I observed. In the corridors, the athletic facilities, the classrooms buzzing with after-hours conversations where students felt safe to speak openly, believing they were unobserved. I was attentive. A woman among the parents visibly expressed discomfort. Over a period, I noted seemingly minor incidents. Yet, these minor incidents accumulated. I saw how some students treated those they perceived as outsiders. I noticed how the lack of intervention from adults permitted that behavior to escalate, and how some of you, who should have been more informed, chose to ignore it. She looked toward the staff. Some of you were aware, and you remained silent. The words struck with force. Camille's mouth felt parched. Olivia had ceased breathing through her nose. She remained motionless, as if blinking would make her vanish. The most troubling aspect, Janice continued, is that the behavior was not concealed. It was open, commonplace, accepted, and frequently it was encouraged, amid smiles, with focus, and with widespread recognition. She paused, taking a moment. I'm not here to criticize you. I'm here to offer a reminder. Her tone became gentler. You cannot determine someone's worth based on their clothing or their profession. You cannot assess dignity through financial status or lineage. She lowered her gaze briefly, then raised her head with renewed focus. I once had a daughter. Her name was Kira. She would have been your age now. A stillness fell over the audience, similar to a chilling breeze. She passed away before she had the opportunity to wear a cap and gown. I'm not sharing this to elicit sympathy. I am sharing it because I see her in all of you. I see who she could have become. And I wonder, if she had been here, would she have been ridiculed as well? No one dared respond. Perhaps not. However, what I know for certain is that if you depart here today believing the world will defer to your name, you have already failed. She paused again. Education is not merely about books and tests. Remember how you handle the individual you believe you'll never require assistance from, because life possesses a peculiar tendency to shift unexpectedly. Subsequently, the final setback occurred. I have delivered my conclusive report to the board. My assessment has led to a restructuring of the scholarship program, emphasizing integrity and contribution rather than legacy. A comprehensive audit of disciplinary cases spanning the last 5 years will be conducted, and students involved in harassment, encompassing verbal and social forms, will be subject to formal reviews. A subtle vibration resonated from the rear. Several parents murmured amongst themselves, their voices becoming more audible. Janice moved back a little. This isn't retribution, it's accountability. She fixed her attention on Camille, then Olivia, who had lowered her gaze to the floor. And accountability is not swayed by the wealth of your father. However, that wasn't the finality of the matter, as repercussions would follow even after the applause subsided. The ceremony concluded with noticeably diminished enthusiasm compared to its start. Some students applauded, while others seemed unsure how to react. A small number of families, appearing uneasy, left the room before the conclusion. However, Janice maintained her composure, smiling as she returned to her place. It wasn't the back row where she previously observed, but rather near the front, alongside board members and professors who now regarded her with a noticeable change, respect. Camille did not speak as she departed the auditorium. Her father was already waiting close to the car, his expression stern, avoiding her gaze. Olivia's mother, arms crossed, stood by the valley in stunned silence. There were no congratulations, no flowers, just silence. Inside, a small crowd had gathered around Janice. Teachers who had previously offered only a polite greeting were now shaking her hand. Mr. Del Toro remained at a respectful distance, waiting for an opportune moment. You didn't simply speak, he stated when they eventually talked. You transformed the entire atmosphere. Janice looked at him and smiled softly. The air had needed changing. Upon the lawn, several of the younger students expressed their awe. A girl wearing a red dress confided to her friend, "I wasn't aware she attended school," to which her friend responded, "I didn't know she could articulate herself so eloquently." A sense of belated recognition began to spread, an acknowledgement of what had been missed, what had been consciously disregarded. That evening, Janice was in her apartment, with a plastic container of leftover chicken salad and the commencement program placed on the table next to her. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the board's director. The subject line read, "Thank you." The message stated, "Your final report is being reviewed. Policy meetings begin next week. Your courage will shape the future of this school." She set the phone down and exhaled. It wasn't relief, it wasn't pride, but a quiet, grounded sense of purpose. The kind that didn't require applause or accolades. Meanwhile, news about the graduation speech spread quickly. A video shared online by a teacher's assistant was already spreading among parents and alumni. The title was straightforward: Janitor or Genius, Larchmont's Graduation Shocker. Regarding Camille and Olivia, Camille was required to attend a disciplinary review. Her parents were obligated to participate. A scheduled summer internship at her father's firm was discreetly canceled. It was rumored that she would be asked to fulfill community service hours before receiving her diploma. Olivia's parents initially resisted, indicating they would pursue legal action and requesting apologies. However, upon the school sharing portions of Janice's records, containing witness statements and documented incidents, they ceased their objections. Olivia was permitted to graduate, although her honors were removed. Both girls remained silent regarding the matter, but those familiar with them observed a change. The teasing ended, and the hushed conversations also stopped. The following fall, Janice received a new opportunity, the role of Director of Equity and Inclusion Initiatives for the school district. She agreed to take the position. On her final day, as she walked the halls with her cart, she placed a sticky note on the supply closet door. It read, "Respect isn't owed, it's revealed." With clean floors, clear eyes, J.A., and a final goodbye, she left the mop behind. Leaving Larchmont Hills, she wore a navy blazer and carried a satchel, not to demonstrate professional advancement, but because she felt no further need for discretion. 1 week later, she returned, not in a work uniform, but as a guest speaker for the new staff orientation. Standing at the podium again, she addressed the teachers, new hires, and assistants. "Your job title doesn't determine your influence," she stated. "How you treat people when no one's looking does." Her voice resonated to the back of the room, and this time, everyone was attentive because they finally grasped the meaning. Respect isn't about volume, it's about the impact you make. If this story resonated with you, if it prompted you to reconsider how we treat people, we believe it's sufficient. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, and discuss it. The world would benefit from more individuals with qualities similar to Janice's, and it's valuable to remember that the most reserved person present could impart the most significant lessons.